A bully tried to push around a disabled war hero in front of a royal guard. But what happened next? One slap, and everything changed. Watch until the end to find out, it might just surprise you. It was a bright and sunny morning at Buckingham Palace. Tourists filled the courtyard, snapping photos and admiring the palace's grandeur. Among them, Tommy Wilson stood out. He was drunk and clearly agitated, his aggressive behavior causing a stir. With slurred words and a menacing look, he spotted the royal guard standing at attention, perfectly still, as he had done countless times before. Tommy's eyes narrowed as he walked toward the guard. With a mocking laugh, he began insulting the guard's uniform, calling it outdated and irrelevant in the modern world. "Look at you," Tommy sneered, "just a statue, standing there like you're something special." His voice was loud, drawing the attention of nearby tourists, some of whom shifted uncomfortably. He got closer, his insults growing harsher. "You think you're tough, huh? In this day and age, you're just here for tourists to stare at. You don't belong here." His taunts were meant to provoke, as Tommy made it clear he believed the guard was weak, a relic of the past with no real purpose in today's world. The tension around them started to rise as Tommy continued to challenge the guard, not expecting the quiet composure that stood in front of him. Tommy's taunts grew louder and more venomous as he stood directly in front of the royal guard. He was determined to break the guard's calm exterior. "What are you really doing here?" Tommy shouted. "You're just a toy soldier, standing around doing nothing. You think your fancy uniform means something? You're just a prop for tourists to take pictures with." He pressed on, questioning the guard's value, mocking him for being stuck in the past, and trying to provoke a response. Tommy's aggression was clear, and he didn't care how far he pushed the boundaries. The royal guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, completely unfazed by the insults. Tommy grew more frustrated with the silence and the lack of reaction. Seeing that the guard didn't flinch, Tommy's attention shifted to something else. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a disabled veteran sitting in a wheelchair nearby, quietly observing the scene. This was another target, someone Tommy believed he could bully into submission. With a sneer on his face, Tommy walked toward the veteran, his footsteps loud on the cobblestones. "Well, look what we have here," Tommy jeered, his voice laced with contempt. "A real hero, huh? You look like you can barely move." He laughed cruelly, mocking the veteran's disability. "What's it like being weak, huh? Can't even stand up for yourself anymore." Tommy's voice grew louder, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "You're just sitting there like a useless old man, while this soldier stands here pretending to be tough." The veteran, however, didn't respond. His weathered face remained calm, and his hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests with quiet dignity. But Tommy wasn't satisfied with the silence. His insults only grew more intense, as he pushed forward with each taunt. "You think anyone respects you? Look at you, a crippled old man, while these soldiers play dress-up." The tension in the crowd started to build. Tourists, who had been watching the scene unfold, began to feel uncomfortable. Some people stepped away, not wanting to be involved, while others fumbled with their phones, recording the escalating confrontation. The air grew thick with unease as Tommy's behavior became more aggressive. He taunted the veteran further, questioning why anyone would respect someone who couldn't fight back. "Pathetic," he spat, "sitting there, pretending like you've got any value." The tourists, sensing the growing hostility, exchanged uneasy glances. Some began to whisper to each other, but no one intervened. Tommy's voice rose even higher, pushing the boundaries further, as he continued to belittle both the veteran and the royal guard, unaware of how far he was pushing the situation. The tension in the courtyard was palpable, and it seemed like something was about to snap. The veteran, despite Tommy's taunts, remained calm and composed. His hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, and he sat up straight, showing no sign of the anger or frustration that Tommy seemed determined to provoke. Tommy's insults, harsh and filled with contempt, bounced off him as if he hadn't heard them at all. His face remained steady, showing a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with Tommy's aggressive posture. Tommy, frustrated by the lack of reaction, grew even louder and more insulting. "What's the matter with you, old man?" Tommy sneered, walking around the veteran's wheelchair. "You're just sitting there, pretending your medals mean something. What's the point? You're not even in the fight anymore." He laughed derisively. "What good are your service medals if you can't even stand on your own?" But the veteran didn't flinch. He simply looked up at Tommy with a calm gaze, unaffected by the words that Tommy thought would make him angry. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, carrying the weight of experience. "These medals," he said quietly, pointing to the ribbons on his chest, "represent more than just a piece of metal. They represent real service. Real sacrifice." His voice remained calm, but there was a depth to it that Tommy couldn't ignore. "I didn't earn these by standing still," he continued, "I earned them by facing the hardships and challenges of battle, and by doing what was necessary to protect others." Tommy paused for a moment, the words hitting harder than he expected. He had been mocking the veteran, but now something in the calmness of the old man's voice seemed to make him question his own attitude. The veteran's words weren't filled with anger, but with wisdom. The kind of wisdom that came from years of experience, from having lived through challenges that Tommy couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Your strength," the veteran added, "isn't about physical power or the ability to stand. It's about what you stand for. What you believe in. And that's something you don't understand, son." Tommy, caught off guard by the veteran's steady gaze and calm response, felt a pang of doubt. The veteran's dignity and quiet strength were far more powerful than Tommy's insults, and it left him momentarily speechless. The crowd, too, began to feel the shift. They had been watching Tommy's behavior with discomfort, but now, there was a respect growing for the veteran and his unwavering composure. The moment was heavy with meaning, and Tommy, for the first time, realized that his words hadn't had the effect he wanted. They hadn't broken the veteran, but instead, had revealed just how little he understood about true strength. Tommy's temper flared as the veteran's calmness continued to frustrate him. The insults, the mocking, all of it seemed to have no effect on the old man, and that only made Tommy angrier. With his hands clenched into fists, he stepped forward, determined to break the veteran's calm facade. "You think you can just sit there and take it?" Tommy shouted, his voice growing louder with each word. "You don't get to just sit there like some statue while I mock you, you hear me?" Tommy's eyes narrowed as he looked down at the disabled veteran in the wheelchair, his contempt turning into something darker. The crowd around them had begun to shift uncomfortably, but Tommy didn't care. The anger inside him was rising, and he saw the veteran as nothing more than an easy target, someone who couldn't fight back. Tommy believed that if he pushed hard enough, he could break the veteran, just as he had done with so many others. In a fit of rage, Tommy reached down toward the wheelchair and, with a harsh shove, tried to tip it over. His plan was simple: humiliate the veteran, force him to fall, and make him feel weak, just like Tommy believed he was. But the moment his hands touched the wheelchair, something changed in the air. The veteran's body remained still, his face unflinching, his eyes locked forward. Despite Tommy's attempt to topple him, he didn't react violently or even try to defend himself physically. Instead, his calmness seemed to stand in stark contrast to Tommy's aggression. His grip on the wheelchair's armrests tightened slightly, but there was no sign of fear, no sign of weakness. He had faced worse, much worse, and nothing Tommy did would break his composure. The Royal Guard, who had been standing still with unyielding discipline nearby, had been watching the scene unfold from the corner of his eye. As soon as Tommy made his move to push the wheelchair, the guard subtly shifted his posture. His eyes, once fixed straight ahead, now shifted slightly toward the confrontation, his focus narrowing. A small shift in his stance revealed his awareness of the escalating situation. His knuckles tightened on the rifle, and the calm that had marked his presence until now seemed to crack ever so slightly. The crowd, too, sensed the change. The atmosphere had shifted from discomfort to something more intense. The tourists who had been watching Tommy's antics now grew quiet, sensing the danger in the air. The tension was palpable, the threat of something violent hanging just above their heads. The royal guard's posture remained disciplined, but his presence was no longer just ceremonial, it was one of readiness, and the crowd could feel it. Tommy, now facing the quiet strength of the veteran and the alertness of the guard, was beginning to realize that he had pushed too far. His aggressive stance faltered slightly as he registered the unwavering authority of the guard and the stoic dignity of the veteran. The crowd held their breath, waiting to see how the situation would unfold. As Tommy's hand gripped the wheelchair and he prepared to tip it over, the royal guard's watchful eye caught the movement. In a fraction of a second, the guard moved. His reaction was swift and precise, the kind of trained response that only years of military discipline could produce. With a firm grip, the guard seized Tommy's shoulder, spinning him around with a single, controlled motion. The force wasn't violent, but it was enough to stop Tommy dead in his tracks. The aggressive bully found himself immobilized, unable to move as the guard's presence overpowered him. Tommy's eyes widened in shock as he registered what had just happened. The calm, composed figure of the royal guard had intervened, and Tommy, for the first time, was the one at a disadvantage. Without a word, the royal guard turned his attention to the veteran. Gently, with care and respect, the guard helped the disabled veteran back into his wheelchair, lifting him with an almost reverent motion. His actions were so deliberate and filled with dignity that Tommy, still frozen, couldn't help but watch in stunned silence. The guard didn't make a show of it, didn't draw attention to his actions, but there was something about the way he moved, how carefully he positioned the veteran, that spoke volumes about his respect and understanding of the man's sacrifice. Once the veteran was safely seated, the guard shifted his attention back to Tommy, whose bravado had all but disappeared. Tommy stood there, bewildered, his chest heaving as if he was struggling to regain some semblance of control. The royal guard's eyes locked with Tommy's, unwavering. There was no anger in the guard's gaze, only the quiet intensity of a man who had seen far more than Tommy could imagine. With a calm yet firm voice, the guard spoke, his words carrying the weight of experience. "Real strength is not found in attacking the vulnerable," he said, his tone even but strong. "It's in protecting those who cannot protect themselves." The guard's words were simple, yet they rang clear in the silence that had enveloped the courtyard. Tommy's fists, which had been clenched just moments before, now hung limply at his sides, his arrogance crumbling with each word the guard spoke. As Tommy stood there, humiliated and exposed, he realized the truth in the guard's words. He had been so wrapped up in his own false sense of power, belittling those he saw as weaker, that he hadn't understood what real strength looked like. The crowd watched, quiet and still, some with a sense of admiration for the guard's composure, others with a quiet understanding of the lesson being taught in front of them. Tommy's bravado had shattered, and now all that was left was the weight of his actions, fully realized. As the royal guard gently steadied the veteran in his wheelchair, the veteran, now facing Tommy, spoke with quiet dignity. His voice was firm, but there was no anger in it, only a calm wisdom that came from living a life filled with real sacrifice. "You don't understand what dignity is, son," the veteran said, his gaze never wavering from Tommy. "Dignity isn't something you can demand from others. It's something you earn, through sacrifice, through courage. It's not about how many punches you can throw or how loud you can shout. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Without a word, the royal guard turned his attention to the veteran. Gently, with care and respect, the guard helped the disabled veteran back into his wheelchair, lifting him with an almost reverent motion. His actions were so deliberate and filled with dignity that Tommy, still frozen, couldn't help but watch in stunned silence. The guard didn't make a show of it, didn't draw attention to his actions, but there was something about the way he moved, how carefully he positioned the veteran, that spoke volumes about his respect and understanding of the man's sacrifice. Once the veteran was safely seated, the guard shifted his attention back to Tommy, whose bravado had all but disappeared. Tommy stood there, bewildered, his chest heaving as if he was struggling to regain some semblance of control. The royal guard's eyes locked with Tommy's, unwavering. There was no anger in the guard's gaze, only the quiet intensity of a man who had seen far more than Tommy could imagine. With a calm yet firm voice, the guard spoke, his words carrying the weight of experience. "Real strength is not found in attacking the vulnerable," he said, his tone even but strong. "It's in protecting those who cannot protect themselves." The guard's words were simple, yet they rang clear in the silence that had enveloped the courtyard. Tommy's fists, which had been clenched just moments before, now hung limply at his sides, his arrogance crumbling with each word the guard spoke. As Tommy stood there, humiliated and exposed, he realized the truth in the guard's words. He had been so wrapped up in his own false sense of power, belittling those he saw as weaker, that he hadn't understood what real strength looked like. The crowd watched, quiet and still, some with a sense of admiration for the guard's composure, others with a quiet understanding of the lesson being taught in front of them. Tommy's bravado had shattered, and now all that was left was the weight of his actions, fully realized. As the royal guard gently steadied the veteran in his wheelchair, the veteran, now facing Tommy, spoke with quiet dignity. His voice was firm, but there was no anger in it, only a calm wisdom that came from living a life filled with real sacrifice. "You don't understand what dignity is, son," the veteran said, his gaze never wavering from Tommy. "Dignity isn't something you can demand from others. It's something you earn, through sacrifice, through courage. It's not about how many punches you can throw or how loud you can shout. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Tommy stood in stunned silence, the weight of the veteran's words slowly sinking in. The bravado he had once carried like armor now seemed hollow, empty. He had mocked the veteran's medals, belittled his sacrifices, and thought himself superior, yet now he saw how small and shallow his actions truly were. The veteran had lived through real hardship, had faced death on the battlefield, and had earned every ounce of respect through his actions, not his words. Reluctantly, Tommy's gaze dropped, and his chest tightened. The crowd around them waited in tense silence, some with pity, others with silent judgment. Finally, Tommy's voice cracked as he spoke, the bravado drained from him. I'm sorry," he mumbled, his words heavy and hesitant. He looked up briefly, his eyes meeting the veteran's, and for the first time, he saw the man, not the wheelchair, not the medals, but the person who had given everything for something greater than himself. The veteran nodded, accepting the apology, but his expression remained steady. There was no triumph in his face, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Tommy's apology was a moment of realization. "It's not just about the words, son," the veteran said softly. "It's about understanding what you did. The apology comes after you've learned the lesson." The royal guard, who had been silently observing, spoke up now, his voice strong and unwavering. "True strength isn't in dominating others," he said, his tone firm but measured. "True strength is in serving something larger than yourself. It's in having the control to stop when you could strike, the compassion to lift others up instead of tearing them down." He turned his gaze back to Tommy, his words carrying the weight of his years of service. "That's the kind of strength we need in this world. The kind that stands for something greater." Tommy's shoulders slumped as he took in the guard's words, the harshness of his own actions laid bare before him. He had come to Buckingham Palace looking to make others feel small, but now, he stood facing the true measure of strength, the ability to rise above petty cruelty and act with integrity. The crowd, which had been watching the entire exchange, slowly began to disperse, but there was a new sense of respect in their eyes. Tommy, standing there with his head bowed, had learned a hard lesson. The royal guard and the veteran had shown him that real power doesn't come from bullying, doesn't come from hurting others. True strength is rooted in service, sacrifice, and the quiet dignity that comes with facing life's hardest challenges. If you learned something today, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. With that, the video ended, leaving the audience to ponder the true nature of strength and respect.